My children were thrilled when they received a generous all-cash offer on my house just 1 week after they moved me into a retirement home for my own safety. They celebrated, dreaming of the new boats and vacations they would buy. They were in such a hurry, they never bothered to ask who the mysterious, deep-pocketed buyer was. If they had, they might have recognized the name of my late husband's lawyer. What they thought was the end of my story was only the beginning of theirs. There are certain things you can't pack in a box. You can't wrap a sunbeam in tissue paper, the specific kind that hits the kitchen floor at 4 p.m. and warms the exact spot where our old dog Buster used to sleep. You can't bubble wrap the ghost of a laugh that still echoes in the hallway, or the faint, lingering scent of my husband's pipe tobacco that on damp evenings I can still smell in the worn fabric of his armchair. My children, David and Linda, they don't understand that. They see a house. I see the complete and total measure of a life. My house sits on Maple Street. It's a modest 2-story colonial, the kind you see in old movies, with a porch swing Richard installed on our 5th anniversary and rose bushes he planted for our 20th. He wasn't a builder by trade, he was an accountant, but he built this house with his love. His literal blood, sweat, and tears are in its foundation, and my memories are its wallpaper. On the frame of the pantry door, a series of pencil marks maps out the vertical journeys of my children. David, age 5. Linda, age 7. The highest mark is Richard's, a confident line with the note, "Still the King," written in his familiar, steady script. Every time I walk past it, I run my fingers over those notches, feeling the topography of my family's history. David and Linda see it as a scuffed doorframe that needs repainting. Lately, their visits have taken on a new, unnerving tone. They arrive bearing groceries I don't need and concerns I don't have. They walk through the rooms with the critical eyes of appraisers, not loving children. "This place is so big for just one person, Mom," Linda said last week, her eyes scanning the ceiling for water stains. "The upkeep must be a nightmare." "The stairs are what worry me," David added, looking at the main staircase as if it were a treacherous mountain face. "What if you fell? You could be here for hours before anyone found you." Their words are always wrapped in the gauze of love and concern, but I can feel the sharp, hard edges of their true intent beneath. They circle the topic of my future like polite, well-dressed vultures. They talk about my next chapter, a chapter they have conveniently already written for me. It's a chapter that doesn't take place here, in the only home I have known for 45 years. It takes place somewhere else, somewhere more manageable. And it leaves this house, this repository of my entire adult life, empty and available. Richard knew this might happen. He was a pragmatist, an accountant who understood human nature better than any poet. "Susie," he told me a few months before he passed, his hand warm on mine as we sat on the porch swing. "The house is yours. It's your fortress. Don't ever let anyone push you out of it before you're ready." I had dismissed his worries at the time. David and Linda were good kids. They loved this house. They would never. But Richard knew something I didn't. He knew that grief fades, but the allure of property values can be a persistent, creeping vine. Now, their suggestions are becoming more frequent. They leave glossy brochures on my coffee table for places with names like Oak Ridge Meadows and Golden Horizon Senior Living. The pictures show smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard and taking watercolor classes. Everyone looks happy, serene, and utterly disconnected from the lives they've left behind. The rooms are all identical, furnished with inoffensive beige furniture, devoid of any history, any scuff marks, any soul. My children see it as a solution, a safe, clean answer to the messy, inconvenient problem of my old age. Last night, David called. We were just thinking, Mom. Linda and I want to come over on Sunday to talk about the future. I know what the talk will be about. It will be about my safety. It will be about their peace of mind. It will be about how much they love me. But what it will really be about are the numbers on a real estate website, the rising property values on Maple Street. They want to pack up my life, to neatly store away the sunbeams and the ghosts of laughter so they can sell the box it all came in. What they don't know is that Richard didn't just leave me with a fortress. He also left me with a blueprint, a secret plan, and a very, very loyal friend to help me execute it. They think they're dealing with a frail old woman. They are about to find out how wrong they are. The Sunday talk, as David had called it, arrived with a feeling of grim inevitability. I baked a lemon drizzle cake, Richard's favorite, filling the house with a cheerful, citrusy scent. It was a small act of defiance, a way of arming my home with the scent of happy memories before the siege began. I arranged the slices on a china plate, set out the coffee cups, and waited. I felt like a general preparing to meet the emissaries of an opposing army under a flag of truce, knowing full well the truce was a lie. They arrived together, a united front. Linda was carrying a sleek leather portfolio, and David had his iPad tucked under his arm. They weren't coming for a casual family chat. They were coming to make a presentation. They began with a volley of overly effusive compliments, the verbal equivalent of a smokescreen. "The garden looks incredible, Mom," Linda said, kissing the air near my cheek. "Those roses! Dad would be so proud." "And you're looking wonderful," David added, giving me a hug that felt more like he was assessing my fragility than expressing affection. "Really, you're an inspiration." We sat in a living room, the untouched lemon cake a sad centerpiece on the coffee table. After a few more minutes of strained pleasantries, David cleared his throat, picked up his iPad, and the meeting officially began. "Mom," he started, his voice adopting a serious, almost funereal tone. "Linda and I have been talking, a lot, and we are worried. We're deeply worried about you." "We lie awake at night," Linda chimed in, her face a carefully constructed mask of concern. "We think about you here, all alone in this big house. Last week I had a nightmare that you slipped on the rug in the upstairs hallway and couldn't get to the phone. I woke up in a cold sweat." The attack was precisely as I had predicted, a campaign of fear, each sentence designed to chip away at my sense of security, to make my beloved home feel like a death trap. They painted a grim picture of my life, a narrative of a frail, helpless woman surrounded by lurking dangers, treacherous stairs, slippery bathtubs, the profound, isolating silence. "We know you think you're fine, Mom," David continued, swiping a finger across his iPad. "And you are. You're amazing. But this house, it's a full-time job. The cleaning, the maintenance, the garden. You spent your whole life taking care of this place and taking care of us. You deserve to rest. You deserve to be pampered." He turned the iPad towards me. On the screen was a picture of a sprawling, beige building that looked like a chain hotel. Gleaming letters on a sign out front read, "Oak Ridge Meadows." "We found the most incredible place, Mom," Linda said, her voice bright with a salesperson's manufactured enthusiasm. She took the iPad, her fingers flying across the screen, showing me a slideshow of glossy, soulless images. "Look, they have water aerobics, a movie theater, a library. There's a garden club. Can you imagine? You would make so many new friends." I stared at the pictures. I saw smiling, white-haired strangers playing cards, their laughter looking staged. I saw a dining hall with rows of identical small tables, each set with a single lonely flower in a bud vase. I saw a bedroom, neat and sterile, with a bland landscape painting on the wall and a view of a perfectly manicured, unnaturally green lawn. I saw what was missing. There were no scuffed door frames. There were no worn armchairs. There were no ghosts of laughter. It wasn't a home. It was a beautifully designed waiting room. "The best part," David said, his voice dropping as he got to the real heart of the presentation, "is the financial security. We ran the numbers. If you sell this house, the equity would more than cover the entrance fee and the monthly dues at Oak Ridge for the rest of your life. You'd have a top-tier medical plan, all your meals cooked for you. You would never have to worry about another bill again. It's a fantastic investment in your future." There it was, the raw, undisguised core of their argument. It wasn't about my safety. It was about liquidating my primary asset. I took a slow sip of my coffee before I answered. "It looks very clean," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "But my life is here, dears. My friends are in this neighborhood. Mrs. Gable is just across the street. My garden, the one your father planted, is right outside that window. I am not lonely, and I am perfectly capable of managing the stairs." I looked directly at David. "And I am not worried about money." My calm, logical resistance was not what they were prepared for. A flicker of irritation crossed Linda's face. "Mom, you're not listening to us," she said, her tone losing its gentle edge. "This isn't about what you want anymore. It's about what's responsible. It's about what you need." "You're just being stubborn," David added, his frustration showing. "We are your children. We love you, and we are trying to do what is best for you. Don't you think Dad would have wanted you to be safe and secure, instead of rattling around in this empty old house?" The invocation of their father, using my love for him as a weapon against me, was a breathtakingly low blow. It was the moment their campaign of concern revealed its true, ugly face. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to break me down, to wear away my resolve with fear and guilt until I finally gave in. The rest of the talk was tense. I remained firm, and they became increasingly petulant, their arguments circling the same points with growing exasperation. They left an hour later, their mission a failure. Linda gave me a cold, disappointed kiss on the cheek. David left the glossy Oak Ridge Meadows brochure on my coffee table, a silent, mocking reminder of their intentions. I stood at the window and watched their car pull away. The cheerful scent of the lemon cake now seemed sickeningly sweet. They had come into my home and tried to declare it, and my life within it, obsolete. They saw me not as their mother, but as an obstacle. An obstacle sitting on an appreciating asset. The battle lines were no longer imaginary. They had been drawn right through my living room, and they had just given me all the justification I needed to fight back. After the failed Sunday talk, a chill descended. My children's daily calls dwindled to infrequent, perfunctory texts. Their visits stopped altogether. It was a classic strategy of emotional withdrawal, a punishment for my disobedience. They were letting me feel the full weight of the isolation they had so vividly described, hoping the silence would break me where their arguments had failed. For 2 weeks, I held firm. I tended my roses. I had coffee with Mrs. Gable. I lived my life. But the silence was a heavy blanket, and I confess, it was beginning to wear on me. Then, the tactic shifted. David called, his voice warm and conciliatory, as if their recent tense encounter had never happened. "Mom, Linda and I were thinking, we've been so stressed lately, and we've been awful. We'd love to take you out for a nice lunch on Saturday. No talks, no pressure, just lunch. Our treat." It was a perfectly laid trap, and I walked right into it. The desire to reconnect with my children, to feel the warmth of my family again, was a pull too strong to resist. We met at a quiet, upscale Italian restaurant downtown. It was neutral territory, a place with no memories, no ghosts. For the first hour, they were wonderful. They were the children I remembered, charming, funny, and attentive. They asked about my garden. Linda showed me pictures of the grandkids' latest soccer game. David told a self-deprecating story about his work. They were softening the ground, lulling me into a false sense of security. The attack, when it came, was all the more brutal for its gentle delivery. It was Linda who began, placing her fork down and fixing me with a look of profound, theatrical sadness. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I have to be honest. I'm not sleeping. I lie awake every night, my mind just racing, imagining you alone in that house. My boss pulled me aside yesterday and asked if everything was all right at home because I've been so distracted at work. This is really affecting me." Before I could respond, David jumped in, his expression one of weary martyrdom. "I had to leave a board meeting early on Tuesday, Mom. You didn't answer your phone on the first 2 rings, and my mind just went to the worst-case scenario. I drove halfway to your house before you finally called me back. I can't work like that. Linda can't sleep. We are falling apart with worry." It was emotional blackmail of the highest order. They were no longer arguing about my safety. They were accusing my independence of actively harming their lives, their health, their careers. They were making me the source of their anxiety, painting me as a selfish, stubborn old woman who was making her own children suffer. I felt the fight go out of me, replaced by a wave of exhaustion. I loved them. The thought of being a true burden to them was a weight I couldn't bear. Seeing my resolve waver, David moved in with the compromise. He reached across the table, his expression softening into one of reason and compassion. "Look, Mom, let's make a deal," he said gently. "We know how much you love the house, we get it. So let's not talk about anything permanent. Just try Oak Ridge Meadows. They have a 1-month trial stay program. You can think of it as a vacation, a spa retreat. All your meals cooked, activities planned, people to talk to. If after 30 days you honestly hate it, you can come right back home. We will never mention it again. No harm, no foul. What do you say?" It sounded so reasonable. A trial run, a vacation, an escape from being the source of my children's pain. But my deepest fear remained. I looked at both of them, my eyes pleading for honesty. "And the house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What happens to the house while I'm on this vacation? I don't want to come back in a month and find a for sale sign on my lawn." This was the moment for the final, most profound lie. David and Linda exchanged a quick, imperceptible glance before turning back to me, their faces masks of wounded sincerity. Linda's eyes welled up with crocodile tears. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "how could you even think that? That house is our entire history. It's where Dad taught us to ride our bikes. It's where you kissed our scraped knees. It is sacred ground." David leaned in, taking both of my hands in his. His grip was firm, his gaze direct and unflinching. "I swear to you, Mom," he said, his voice low and solemn, "on Dad's memory, we would never, ever sell that house without your express permission. This is not and has never been about the house. It is only about you being safe and us finally having some peace of mind. That is my solemn promise to you." His promise, invoking the memory of my husband, was the final blow. It was a sacred oath, and to believe they would lie about that felt like a betrayal of Richard all over again. Worn down by their campaign of guilt, exhausted from the fight, and clinging to the life raft of their seemingly reasonable compromise, I finally gave in. "All right," I whispered, the words feeling like a surrender. "1 month. I'll try it." The relief that washed over their faces was instantaneous and immense. It was too much, too quick. It felt less like the relief of worried children and more like the elation of salespeople who had just closed a difficult deal. They immediately became bright and efficient, talking animatedly about arranging the movers, packing my things, booking my trial stay. I sat back in my chair, the expensive tiramisu on my plate suddenly tasting like ashes. I nodded and smiled, but a cold, heavy dread was settling in my stomach. I had just agreed to my own exile. I had put my faith in a promise that had felt as hollow as a rotted-out tree, even as it was being made. As I watched my happy, relieved children plan my departure, I felt like I was watching strangers. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The day they moved me to Oak Ridge Meadows felt like a well-organized funeral for a life I was still living. David and Linda were models of brisk, cheerful efficiency, a stark contrast to my own heavy heart. They packed a few curated boxes of my belongings, a handful of photo albums, my favorite reading lamp, the lopsided wooden bird Richard had carved for me. The rest of my life, the thousands of books, the worn quilts, the kitchen full of well-used pans, was left behind, covered in dust cloths. "Just the essentials for your little vacation, Mom," Linda had chirped, her voice too bright. My room at Oak Ridge was number 21B. It was perfectly pleasant, spotlessly clean, and utterly soulless. It was a beige box, furnished with a firm bed, a small desk, and an armchair upholstered in a durable, forgettable fabric. It smelled of latex paint and industrial-strength air freshener. The single large window was sealed shut and looked out onto a lawn so perfectly green and manicured, it looked like plastic. My personal belongings, when they were unpacked, looked like artifacts in a museum exhibit. The life of Susan Miller, circa 1980 to 2025. They seemed small and out of place, swallowed by the room's aggressive neutrality. The first week was a blur of forced cheerfulness. The staff, all young and relentlessly upbeat, called me Susan Dear and encouraged me to join the scheduled activities with the fervor of cruise ship directors. There was sit-and-fit aerobics in the morning, followed by bingo, followed by a communal lunch in the dining hall, a cavernous room called the Oak Room. The food was nutritious, served on trays, and tasted of nothing in particular. I tried. For my children's sake, I truly did. I attended a watercolor class where we all painted the same bowl of plastic fruit. I sat through a movie night showing a film from the 1950s that everyone had seen a dozen times. I made polite, superficial conversation in the dining hall. The other residents were like me, mostly widows and widowers, all speaking in the past tense. They spoke of the houses they had sold, the careers they had left behind, the children who were now too busy to visit more than once a month. We were all politely waiting, The conversations were a gentle, circular dance around the one topic that was never mentioned: that this was the last stop. Every night I would lie awake in the unfamiliar bed, the silence of the room somehow louder than the silence of my own home. My house had a language. The groan of the pipes, the creak of the floorboards, the gentle sigh of the old walls settling. This room was mute. I would reach for the bedside table where Richard's reading glasses had sat for 40 years, and my hand would meet empty air. I was unmoored, a ship cut loose from its anchor, drifting in a calm beige sea. The loneliness was a physical presence, a constant ache in my chest. It wasn't the absence of people. I was surrounded by them. It was the absence of history, of meaning. During a bland lunch of baked cod and steamed vegetables, I found my mind drifting back to my kitchen on Maple Street. I could almost taste Richard's terrible, burnt on the outside, raw on the inside barbecue, and the memory made my eyes well up with tears. I missed the imperfections. I missed the clutter. I missed the life that had happened within those walls. This place, Oak Ridge Meadows, was not a home. It was the absence of a home. It was a gilded cage, and its comfort was a form of suffocation. My children called, their voices always bright and anxious for a good report. "How are you settling in, Mom? Are you making friends?" Linda would ask. "Did you try the water aerobics? I hear it's fantastic," David would add. They didn't want to hear the truth. They didn't want to hear that I spent most of my days in my room, reading books I'd already read. They didn't want to hear that the polite smiles of the other residents felt a universe away. They wanted to hear that their decision was the correct one, that their guilt was assuaged, that I was happy. So I gave them what they wanted. "It's very nice, dear," I would say, my voice a flat, tired echo of itself. "The staff are all so helpful." The lie was for their comfort, not mine. With each passing day, I felt myself fading. I was no longer Susan Miller, the woman who could coax prize-winning roses from the stubborn clay soil, the woman who knew every creak and groan of her beloved house. I was becoming Resident 21B, a passive recipient of scheduled meals and managed care. The promise David had made, the one he had sworn on his father's memory, felt thinner and more transparent with every sterile, identical day that passed. A growing sense of dread began to bloom in my heart, a thorny, invasive weed that was choking out the last of my hope. I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew it was coming. 3 weeks at Oak Ridge Meadows felt like 3 years. The days bled into one another in a monotonous beige blur of scheduled activities and bland, lukewarm meals. I had learned the residents' routines, the staff's practice pleasantries, the exact timing of the afternoon bingo game which I steadfastly refused to attend. My trial stay, the vacation my children had promised, felt more like a life sentence in a minimum security prison, where the bars were made of unrelenting kindness and condescending pity. My grief for my old life has settled into a dull, chronic ache, a constant companion in the sterile silence of my room. Hope had become a foreign country I could no longer remember how to visit. I was sitting in the armchair, staring out the sealed window at a man methodically mowing the impossibly perfect lawn, when the telephone on my bedside table rang. Its shrill, unfamiliar jangle startled me. My children always called my cell phone. No one else ever called me here. The caller ID displayed a name that was a sudden, welcome breath of fresh air from a world I thought I had lost. Margaret Gable. "Margaret!" I said, my voice thick with an emotion that surprised me. "How lovely to hear from you." "Susan, dear, I was just thinking of you." Her voice, a familiar and comforting crackle over the line, was a balm to my soul. "I was looking over at your roses. They're having a wonderful second bloom. I was wondering if you wanted me to deadhead them for you." "Oh, would you? That would be wonderful," I said, a lump forming in my throat. The image of my roses, my beautiful, unruly, living roses, was so vivid it was painful. We chatted for a few minutes about the neighborhood, the weather, the latest gossip from the book club. It was a normal, beautiful, boring conversation, and I was soaking it in like a plant in a drought. Then her tone shifted. There was a slight hesitation, an awkward clearing of her throat that immediately put me on high alert. "Now, Susan," she began, her voice dropping. I'm not one to meddle, you know that, and I am absolutely certain there is a perfectly reasonable explanation for this, but I saw something this morning, and I felt you ought to know." The cold dread that had been a dull hum in the back of my mind for weeks began to thrum with a new, sickening intensity. "What is it, Margaret?" I asked, my grip tightening on the receiver. "Well, a truck from Coldwell Banker came by about an hour ago," she said, speaking slowly as if to soften the blow. "And, well, they put one of their big signs up on your front lawn. The red and white one? It's a for sale sign, dear." The world stopped. The man on the lawnmower, the sunbeam on the beige carpet, the ticking of the clock, everything just ceased to exist. All I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears and Margaret's words echoing in the silent, hollow space that had just opened up inside of me. A for sale sign. The promise. The solemn vow sworn on my husband's memory. It had all been a lie. A cheap, disgusting, calculated lie. "Susan, are you still there? I'm sure David and Linda have a good reason," Margaret said, her voice full of worried concern. I wasn't surprised. That was the most terrible part. Deep down, a part of me had known. I had let them lead me away with their hollow promises because the alternative, that my own children could be so cruel, so greedy, so utterly devoid of honor, was too monstrous to contemplate. But here it was. The monster was real. The pain was breathtaking. It was a sharp, physical agony, as if a vital organ had been ripped from my body. They had not only betrayed me, they had desecrated the memory of their father to do it. "Susan, dear," Margaret's voice pulled me back from the edge. The wave of pain receded, and in its place something else washed in, something cold and hard and clear. It was rage, a pure, clean, clarifying rage that burned away the fog of grief and loneliness I had been living in for weeks. The frail, sad woman in room 21B was gone. In her place was Susan Miller, the woman who had helped her husband build a life from nothing, the woman who had raised 2 children, the woman whose house was being stolen out from under her, and she was not going to let it happen. My voice, when I spoke, was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had just been handed a declaration of war and was already planning her counterattack. "Margaret," I said, my tone now sharp and focused, "you have been a wonderful friend. Could you do me one more favor? Could you walk over and read me the name of the real estate agent on the sign, and the phone number?" "Of course, dear," she said, a note of relief in her voice that I was coherent. I heard the clatter of her putting the phone down, the sound of her front door opening and closing. A minute later she was back. She read out the name, Cynthia Bishop, and a phone number, and I wrote them down with a steady hand on the notepad provided by Oak Ridge Meadows. After I thanked her and hung up the phone, I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat perfectly still in the beige armchair, in the beige room, and I looked at the name and number on the piece of paper. This was my enemy's name. This was the first thread. I would pull on it, and I would unravel their entire treacherous plan. I looked around the room, at the inoffensive art, the sealed window, the emergency pull cord by the bed. This wasn't a gilded cage anymore. It was a command center. My children thought I was neutralized, safely warehoused while they carved up my life for profit. They thought the game was over. They had no idea that I was just about to make my first move. I picked up my cell phone, my fingers scrolling past David, past Linda, to a name I had not needed to call in a very long time, but a name I trusted more than any other. The screen glowed with the contact information for Arthur Davis, attorney at law. I stared at the name on the notepad. Arthur Davis. For over 30 years, he had been more than our lawyer. He was our friend, our confidant, the keeper of our family's most important truths. Richard had trusted him implicitly, not just for his sharp legal mind, but for his unwavering moral compass. I knew with the certainty that settled deep in my bones that Arthur would not see this as a simple property dispute. He would see it as a desecration. My hand was steady as I dialed his private office number, a number I hadn't used since the days after Richard's funeral. His assistant put me through immediately.
"Susan!"
His voice, a warm and familiar baritone, was a comfort in the sterile emptiness of my room.
"What a pleasant surprise. Is everything all right?"
There was no point in preamble. The time for polite conversation was over. "Arthur," I said, my voice low and even. "I need your help. I'm calling because David and Linda have put my house on the market. They moved me into Oak Ridge Meadows 3 weeks ago, telling me it was a 1-month trial. Today my neighbor called. There is a Coldwell Banker sign on my front lawn." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. It wasn't a silence of surprise, but of profound, weary resignation. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its warmth, replaced by a quiet, professional fury.
"Susan, I am so deeply sorry to hear you say those words,"
he said, letting out a long, slow breath.
"Though I can't say I'm entirely surprised. Richard and I had many conversations over the years. He worried about this."
He worried that his success might one day become a temptation his children couldn't resist. He paused. "They are acting illegally, Susan, and with a shocking degree of dishonor. The will is ironclad on this point, as you know." "I know," I said, "but they don't know that I know. They think I'm just a confused old woman they've safely tucked away." "Well then," Arthur said, a new hard edge to his voice, "we shall have to correct their misconception. Can you meet me? Not at your facility, and not at my office. It's too conspicuous. There's a quiet hotel lobby, the Ambassador, about a mile from you, the tea lounge in the back. Can you get there in 1 hour?" "I'll be there," I said. Getting out of Oak Ridge Meadows felt like a small-scale prison break. I walked to the front desk, where a relentlessly cheerful activities director named Brenda was trying to rally residents for a chair yoga session. "Brenda, dear," I said, putting on my most convincing, frail but determined expression. "I completely forgot. I have an appointment with a specialist across town. I've already called a cab." "Oh, Susan, dear, do you need one of our drivers to take you?" she asked, her voice oozing with practiced concern. No, it's all arranged. I won't be long," I said, and before she could protest further, I walked out the automatic glass doors and into the fresh, free air. For the first time in 3 weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't a resident on an approved outing. I was a woman on a mission. Arthur was waiting for me in a quiet, leather-lined corner of the tea lounge. He stood as I approached, taking both of my hands in his. He looked older, his face more lined than I remembered, but his eyes were as sharp and intelligent as ever. "Susan," he said, his expression grim. "To think they would do this. To Richard's memory. It's despicable." We sat, and over cups of Earl Grey tea that neither of us touched, I told him everything. The campaign of concern, the emotional blackmail, and the hollow promise sworn on Richard's grave. He listened without interruption, his hands steepled in front of him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Legally, this is simple," he he said, his voice the calm, reassuring tone of a lawyer in his element. "We can shut this down with a single cease and desist letter to the realtor. We can file for an injunction. We can threaten to have their power of attorney revoked for fraudulent misuse. We can stop them, cold." I looked at him, at this good, decent man who had been my friend for so long, and I knew that simply stopping them wasn't enough. "No, Arthur," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "That's not enough. A letter won't teach them anything. They'll just see it as a legal roadblock. They'll retreat and they'll wait, and they'll try again later. They didn't just break a law. They spat on their father's memory. They used my love for them and their love for me as a weapon to get what they wanted. I don't just want to stop them. I want them to understand the full, ugly scope of what they've done. I want them to walk willingly into a trap of their own making." A slow smile spread across Arthur's face, a glint of the old courtroom warrior appearing in his eyes. "Richard always did admire an elegant strategy," he said. "A lawsuit would be messy, public, and painful for you. But I believe you're right. A lesson is in order, and I think I know just the way to deliver it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "They want to sell the house so badly? Fine. We'll let them. We will give them the buyer they are dreaming of. A mysterious corporation, an all-cash offer well above asking price, with a request for a quick, no-fuss closing. An offer so perfect, so dripping with greed, that they won't be able to resist." "A corporation?" I asked, confused. "My corporation," he clarified. "A shell company I use for discreet transactions, and the funds for the purchase." He paused, a twinkle in his eye. "Will come from you." He went on to explain Richard's final, brilliant act of foresight, a private trust, separate from the main estate, that he had set up for me years ago, an emergency fund the children knew nothing about, with Arthur as the sole trustee besides myself. The sheer, beautiful simplicity of the plan settled over me. We would use their greed as the bait and my own secret money as the hook. They would be delirious with joy, thinking they had won, right up until the final moment. When I returned to Oak Ridge Meadows, the sun was setting. I smiled at Brenda at the front desk and went back to my room. I was no longer resident 21B, a prisoner in a beige box. I was a client, a co-conspirator, a woman setting in motion a plan of elegant, righteous revenge. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a hot, burning fire. It had been forged into something cold, hard, and patient. I was setting a trap, and I would wait as long as it took for my children to come and claim their prize. The days following my meeting with Arthur were different. I was still physically present at Oak Ridge Meadows, a resident of room 21B, but my spirit had gone elsewhere. I was a spy behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence, waiting for the moment to strike. I even attended the Wednesday morning bingo game, my mind a million miles away, planning my next move, while a cheerful volunteer called out, "G54!" I smiled politely at my table mates, a silent apology in my heart. They saw a fellow resident, resigned to her fate. They had no idea I was a woman actively plotting to reclaim her life. On Tuesday, a discreet package arrived for me via a bonded courier. It was from Arthur. Inside, there was no letter, only a single document, a crisp, clean copy of Richard's last will and testament. A yellow sticky note was attached to the third page, with Arthur's neat block handwriting. "The part that matters most. Read it and remember, you are standing on solid rock." My hands trembled slightly as I read the highlighted section. It was Article 4, Section B. The language was dense, legalistic, but the meaning was as clear and bright as a lighthouse beam in a storm. It is my express wish and legally binding directive that my beloved wife, Susan Miller, shall be granted a life estate in our primary residence located at 12 Maple Street, Biennois. She shall have the sole and exclusive right to inhabit, use, and enjoy said property for the remainder of her natural life without interference. Said property may not be sold, leased, mortgaged, or otherwise encumbered during her lifetime without her express, notarized, written consent. Reading those words felt like hearing Richard's voice, a steady, reassuring murmur from the past. A life estate, a fortress. He had known. He had anticipated the weakness in his own children and had built me this final, unbreachable wall of defense. I ran my fingers over the words, a final love letter written in the cold, hard language of the law. This wasn't just a legal document. It was my shield and my sword. The guilt I'd felt about deceiving my own children evaporated, replaced by the righteous certainty that I was not just defending a house. I was honoring my husband's last wish to protect me. That afternoon, Arthur called me on my cell phone. "Did you receive the package?" "I did," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Arthur." I had forgotten how definitive he was. "Richard didn't believe in half measures," Arthur said warmly. "Now, are you ready for the first move? The bait is about to be placed in the water." "I'm ready," I said. "Good," he replied, his tone shifting to one of crisp, businesslike efficiency. "I am about to call the realtor, Ms. Cynthia Bishop. I will introduce myself as Arthur Davis, a buyer's agent representing a private investment firm, RD Investments. I will explain that my client is looking to acquire properties in stable, family-oriented neighborhoods for long-term holding. I will tell her we are prepared to make an immediate, all-cash offer, well above the asking price, on the condition that we can have a swift, uncomplicated closing. I will be polite, professional, and sound like the answer to her every prayer." Before he hung up, I had to ask the question that had been nagging at me. "Arthur, how could they even list the house in the first place? Don't I have to sign the listing agreement?" I heard him let out a weary sigh. "They are using the general power of attorney you signed over to them last year, Susan. They are meant to use it to manage your finances, pay your bills. They are illegally overstepping its authority, misrepresenting to the realtor that they have the right to liquidate your primary asset. They are counting on the fact that you are tucked away in here, too frail, confused, or intimidated to object. That is the legal definition of fraud, Susan. And that is precisely what we are going to prove." An hour later, he called back. "The fish has taken the bait," he said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. It went precisely as planned. Ms. Bishop was practically giddy. An all-cash offer above asking? She couldn't believe her luck. She didn't ask a single question about RD Investments. She was too busy calculating her commission. She is calling David and Linda as we speak to present what she called a once-in-a-lifetime dream offer. The trap is set, Susan. A wave of profound sadness washed over me. There was no joy in this, no thrill of victory, only the deep, hollow ache of a mother's broken heart. It was a tragedy that my children's greed was so predictable, their betrayal so easily manipulated. I was mourning the children I thought I had raised, the honorable people I believed them to be. I looked at Richard's will, at the iron clause he had so thoughtfully put in place. This was his last act of love, a final piece of foresight to protect me from the very people we had created together. My course was now set. I had the law on my side, a loyal friend at the helm, and a clear, elegant plan. All that was left for me to do was play my part, the frail, docile, slightly confused mother in her gilded cage. I would wait for them to come to me with the good news, and I would smile, and I would nod, and I would let them walk, fat with greed and blind with arrogance, right into the center of the web we had so carefully woven. The call came on a Saturday morning. I was in the sunroom at Oak Ridge, a glassed-in porch filled with wilting ferns and uncomfortable wicker furniture, pretending to read a large print copy of a romance novel. In reality, I was watching the entrance, waiting. Arthur had called the day before with the brief, grimly satisfied update.
"The hook is set, Susan,"
He had said.
"The realtor presented our offer. David and Linda have accepted it. The closing is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. They will be coming to see you. Be ready."
So I waited. I knew they would be giddy, high on the scent of money, and eager to secure what they believed was the final piece of their victory. They would come bearing gifts and false smiles. They did not disappoint. Just before 11, I saw David's sleek black BMW pull into the visitor parking lot. A few moments later, he and Linda walked through the automatic doors, their arms laden with offerings. A ridiculously large bouquet of flowers, a box of expensive chocolates, and a stack of glossy magazines. They were radiating a triumphant manic energy, like hunters returning with the prize kill. They found me in the sunroom and put on a grand performance for the other residents, who were watching with mild curiosity. "Mom!" Linda chirped, rushing over to kiss my cheek. "We've been so worried. We brought you some things to brighten up your room."
"You're looking well,"
David added, handing me the heavy box of chocolates as if it were a diplomatic tribute.
"Is this place treating you right?"
They were laying it on so thick it was almost comical. I played my part, thanking them with a watery, grateful smile, allowing them to lead me back to the beige privacy of my room. They sat on the edge of my bed, a united front of loving, concerned children. I sat in the armchair, the docile, frail mother, and waited for the performance to continue. "Mom," David began, his voice taking on the same serious, sincere tone he had used when he'd promised not to sell the house. "We have some wonderful, truly wonderful news. It's an answer to our prayers, really." "We know how worried you've been about the house," Linda seamlessly picked up, her eyes wide and earnest. "And we've been worried too, about the upkeep and the taxes and everything. Well, something incredible has happened." She paused for dramatic effect, leaning forward and placing her hand on my knee. "Out of the blue, we received an offer to buy the house. A remarkable offer, Mom. From a private investment company that wants to hold it as a long-term rental." "It's for a price we never could have dreamed of," David said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Enough money, Mom, to pay for your place here at Oak Ridge, the best room, the best care, for the rest of your life, with plenty left over. You will never have to worry about a single thing ever again. Your future will be completely secure." They presented it as a miracle, a stroke of unbelievable good fortune that had landed in our laps. They spoke of financial security and my future, never once mentioning the new boat or the condo in Florida that I knew were the real objects of their desire. I looked at them, at their bright, eager faces, and I felt a wave of nausea. They were so good at this. They had rationalized their betrayal so completely that they had cast themselves as the heroes of the story, the dutiful children securing their mother's future. They actually believed their own lies. I had to play my part. I let my eyes well up with tears, an easy task, as my heart was genuinely breaking. "Oh my," I whispered, dabbing at my eyes with the tissue. "To sell the house. It's so much to take in. Your father loved that house so much." This was their cue for the final act of manipulation. "We know, Mom, we know," Linda said, her voice soft and soothing, and we love it too. But Dad would have wanted you to be safe and secure more than anything. This isn't a betrayal of his memory. It's a fulfillment of it. He's probably looking down right now, so happy that you're going to be taken care of. The blasphemy of it, the sheer, audacious hypocrisy almost made me gasp, but I held my tongue. I let my feigned grief slowly subside into a state of weary, confused acceptance. Well, if you both think it's for the best, I said, my voice small and uncertain. You know best about these financial things. I trust your judgment. The relief on their faces was a physical thing. They had done it. They had convinced the old woman. We do, Mom. We really do, David said, his voice full of confidence. There are just a few papers we'll need you to sign, Linda said, her tone breezy and casual. Just formalities for the estate, to make sure everything is allocated to your long-term care fund. We can bring them by next week. Of course, dear, I said, giving them a weak but trusting smile. They didn't stay long after that. They had accomplished their mission. They left the flowers, the chocolates, the magazines, and a cloud of self-congratulatory righteousness. I stood at my window and watched their car drive away, a knot of ice forming in my stomach. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully manipulated their frail, aging mother into giving up her home and her history. They were celebrating their brilliance, their cunning. They had no idea that they hadn't been the predators in that room. They were the prey. And they had just eaten the bait, swallowed the hook, and were now swimming, fat and happy, right towards the fisherman's net. The 2 weeks leading up to the closing were the longest of my life. For my children, it was a period of giddy anticipation, a pre-celebration of a future they had stolen. For me, it was a time of quiet, nerve-shredding patience, the long, tense wait of a hunter sitting silently in a blind. I learned of their celebrations in snippets, from the background noise of their brief, dutiful phone calls. One afternoon, I heard the distinct sound of seagulls and Linda laughing. "Oh, Mom," she'd said when I asked. "David and I are just down at the waterfront having lunch. We're looking at some boats. Can you believe it? David's always wanted a sailboat." A few days later, David called, and I could hear the rustle of papers. He told me he was at his accountant's office, just doing some financial planning. They were spending my home a dozen times over before the ink on the contract was even dry. They had convinced themselves so thoroughly of their own righteousness that they felt no need for discretion. They were the dutiful children who had finally managed their difficult, stubborn mother, and now they were reaping their just rewards. They had no remorse, because in their minds, they had committed no crime. They had simply been more clever, more modern, more practical than I was. Linda arrived the following Tuesday, a slim leather portfolio in her hand and a bright, businesslike smile on her face. She found me in the communal garden, where I was half-heartedly pruning some azaleas that were not my own. "There you are," she chirped. "Just the woman I was looking for. I have those boring papers for you to sign." We went back to my room, the beige box that was supposed to be my entire world, now. She spread a thick stack of documents on the small desk, a dizzying array of legal jargon and dotted lines. She was breezy and condescending, treating me like a child who needed help with her homework. "Okay, Mom, this is super simple," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the first page. "This one is just an updated consent form for your long-term care here at Oak Ridge. I need your signature at the bottom." She flipped a few pages. "This one authorizes the transfer of the, estate proceeds into the care trust." She flipped again. And this one is just a standard tax form, so if you can just sign here, here, and initial here and here. She pointed to each line, her finger guiding my hand. She didn't expect me to read it. She didn't want me to read it. I played my part beautifully. I squinted at the pages, put on my reading glasses with a slightly shaky hand, and gave a confused sigh. Oh, it's all so complicated. You know best, dear, I murmured, and then I began to sign. My hand was steady as I wrote Susan Miller on each line. With every signature, I was giving them another length of rope. I wasn't signing away my house. I was signing their confession. Each signature was a testament to their fraud, a final concrete piece of evidence of their intent to deceive me. Linda watched me, her expression one of barely concealed impatience, eager to be done with the boring logistics so she could get back to the exciting business of spending my money. When I had finished, she gathered the papers, gave them a neat tap on the desk, and slid them back into her portfolio. Perfect, all done, she said, giving me a brisk, satisfied pat on the shoulder. You are all set, Mom, for life. While they were celebrating, I was having my own, much quieter conversations. Arthur and I spoke every other day, our calls a clandestine lifeline. They've waived the inspection and the appraisal, he told me one afternoon. Cynthia Bishop is beside herself with joy. She told Linda it was the cleanest deal she had seen in her entire career. She has no idea, I had replied, a grim smile on my face. None at all, Arthur confirmed. The funds have been transferred from your private trust into the RD Investments holding account. The check for the closing is drawn and ready. All our pieces are in place, Susan. All you have to do is hold steady. The performance of a lifetime. Holding steady was the hardest part. I had to endure the cheerful staff at Oak Ridge, the well-meaning but empty conversations with other residents, all while a silent, high-stakes battle for my life was being waged. I felt like a dormant volcano, my surface calm and placid, while a furious, molten core of rage and determination churned within me. What kept me going was the memory of Richard's face, the feeling of his hand in mine on the porch swing. I was fighting for him as much as for myself. The night before the closing, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my window, looking out at the manicured lawn bathed in the sterile orange glow of the security lights. Tomorrow, after weeks of lies and manipulation, after years of my children's creeping greed, it would all come to a head in a lawyer's office downtown. They believed they were going to a coronation where they would be crowned with the wealth they felt they were owed. They had no idea they were walking into a courtroom where I would not be the victim, but the judge, the jury, and the final surprise witness for the prosecution. In my closet, hidden beneath a winter blanket, was a small overnight bag, and laid out carefully on the spare chair was the suit I planned to wear. A smart, elegant navy blue dress and jacket. Not the clothes of a frail resident of Oak Ridge Meadows. The clothes of Susan Miller, a woman who was about to take her house back. The morning of the closing, I woke before dawn. A profound, almost unnatural calm had settled over me. The anxiety of the past 2 weeks had vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity. Today, the waiting would end. Today, the truth would have its say. I bypassed the communal breakfast, opting for the simple tea and toast I prepared in my room. Then I got dressed. I took my time, putting on the navy blue suit I had saved for this very day. It was a suit I had bought with Richard to wear to board meetings, a suit of quiet authority and confidence. As I looked at my reflection in the small bathroom mirror, I no longer saw Resident 21B. I saw Susan Miller, and she was ready. At precisely 9 o'clock, Arthur Davis's car, a stately and discreet black sedan, pulled up to the entrance of Oak Ridge Meadows. I walked out to meet him, carrying my small overnight bag. The cheerful activities director, Brenda, saw me from the front desk. "Susan, dear, are you going on a little trip?" she asked, her voice full of patronizing sweetness. "You could say that, Brenda," I replied with a small, genuine smile. "I'm just going home." The ride downtown was mostly silent. Arthur, ever the gentleman, seemed to understand that I needed these few moments to gather my thoughts. As we pulled up in front of the tall glass building that housed the title company, he turned to me. "Ready for this, Susan?" he asked, his eyes kind but serious. "I'm ready, Arthur," I said, my voice steady. "Let's go reclaim my house." The office of the Northwood Title Company was on the 12th floor. It was a space designed to be calming and impressive, all polished wood, soft lighting, and the hushed, reverent atmosphere of big money changing hands. We were shown into a large conference room with a long, gleaming mahogany table and a panoramic view of the city. We were the first to arrive. David and Linda arrived 10 minutes later, separately, but with the same air of barely contained, triumphant excitement. They were dressed for a celebration. Linda was in a bright, expensive-looking dress, David in a suit that was a little too flashy. They were performing the role of successful, important people closing a major deal. "Mom," Linda said, her surprise at seeing me there evident. "I didn't know you were coming. I told you didn't have to bother with all this." "I wanted to be here," I said quietly, playing my part, "to say goodbye to the house, properly." Of course," David said, patting my shoulder condescendingly. "Don't you worry, Mom. This will be over before you know it. Just a few simple signatures." They took seats opposite me, spreading their files and phones on the table. They were a whirlwind of nervous energy, making small talk with the title agent, a placid, professional woman named Ms. Jennings, and chattering about their plans. "The market in Naples is just unbelievable right now," Linda was saying to David, loud enough for me to hear. "But I think we found the perfect little condo just a block from the beach." "Just wait till you see the specs on the new boat I'm looking at," David countered, pulling up a picture on his phone. They were grotesque. They were two vultures picking over a carcass before the animal was even dead, and they were doing it right in front of me. I felt a flash of hot anger, but I pushed it down, replacing it with an icy calm. Their performance was just more evidence, more fuel for the fire that was to come. I sat back in my chair, a quiet, gray-haired old woman, and I watched them. I watched them gloat and preen and congratulate each other on their cleverness, and I let them dig their own graves a little deeper with every self-serving word. Ms. Jennings, the title agent, finished arranging her formidable stacks of paper. "Well," she said, looking up with a polite smile, "the seller's documents are all in order. We are just waiting for the representative from the buyer, RD Investments, to arrive. As soon as they are here and have signed, we can release the funds." At the mention of the funds, both David and Linda sat up a little straighter, their eyes fixed on the conference room door like predators watching a rabbit hole. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The arrival of the faceless corporation that would make them rich. The minutes ticked by. David checked his watch impatiently. Linda reapplied her lipstick. The air in the room was thick with their greed. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart beating a slow, steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I knew who was about to walk through that door. They did not. In that moment, in that hushed, expensive room, I felt a surge of power that was dizzying. It was the power of the truth, waiting patiently in the wings for its cue. Miss Jennings looked up from her papers. "Ah, it seems they're here now." As if on cue, the heavy wood door of the conference room swung silently open. The heavy wood door swung open, and a man stepped into the conference room. It was not a stranger. It was Arthur Davis. He was dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, carrying a handsome leather briefcase. He looked less like the comfortable, semi-retired family lawyer my children knew, and more like the formidable corporate attorney he had been in his prime. David and Linda stared, their triumphant smiles faltering into expressions of pure, unadulterated confusion. "Mr. Davis?" David said, half rising from his chair. "What on earth are you doing here? Did Mom call you? We told you you didn't need to bother with all this. We have everything under control for her." His tone was a mixture of surprise and condescending annoyance, as if a well-meaning but slightly senile family retainer had wandered into a board meeting. Linda forced a tight, brittle smile. "It's so good of you to come, Arthur, but really, this is just a formality. We're taking care of everything." Arthur completely ignored them. His eyes first found mine, and he gave me a single, steady, reassuring nod. Then he turned his attention to the title agent, who was looking on with polite curiosity. He walked to the head of the table and placed his briefcase down with a soft, authoritative click. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "My apologies for the slight delay. Arthur Davis, I am here on behalf of the buyer, RD Investments." The sentence dropped into the superheated, greedy atmosphere of the room like a shard of ice. For a moment, there was only a stunned, ringing silence. David and Linda froze, their mouths slightly agape. I watched the sequence of emotions play across their faces like a weather front moving in. First, a blank incomprehension. Then, as their brains scrambled to process the impossible words, a flicker of dawning suspicion. And finally, as they looked from Arthur's calm, unreadable face to my own quiet, watchful one, the bloom of a cold, terrifying alarm. You're what?" Linda stammered, the color draining from her face. "You're the buyer's representative?" "No, Ms. Miller," Arthur corrected gently, taking a seat at the head of the table. "To be precise, I am the buyer's representative, but the distinction is academic. RD Investments is my firm." The trap had sprung. The looks on my children's faces were a terrible, satisfying sight. The giddy joy of a moment ago had vanished, replaced by a frantic, panicked confusion. They were no longer predators closing in on a kill. They were animals who had just heard the sharp, metallic click of a trap closing around their own legs. Their eyes darted between the two of us, finally seeing not a frail old woman and her kindly lawyer, but a pair of seasoned conspirators. "What is this?" David demanded, his voice a low, angry growl. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Mom, did you know about this? Is this some kind of sick joke?" "I assure you, Mr. Miller, this is no joke," Arthur said smoothly, completely unruffled. He addressed the title agent again, pointedly ignoring my children's rising panic. "Ms. Jennings, I believe you have all the necessary documents from my firm, as well as the cashier's check for the full purchase price. We are prepared to sign immediately and close the transaction." His calm, procedural language was a form of torture for them. He was treating this as a perfectly normal business deal, a reality so divorced from their understanding of the situation that it was making them unravel. "Wait just a minute!" Linda cried out, her voice rising in pitch. "Nobody is signing anything until you tell us what the hell is going on." The title agent, Ms. Jennings, looked from my children's panicked faces to Arthur's placid one, her professional neutrality beginning to fray. She was a facilitator of calm, boring real estate transactions, and she had just found herself in the middle of a family psychodrama. Arthur finally turned his full attention to my children. He looked at them not with anger, but with a kind of weary disappointment, the look of a teacher gazing upon two prize pupils who had cheated on their final exam.
"What is going on?"
he said, his voice dropping to a serious, almost somber tone.
"Is a real estate closing.
You, as the seller's representatives, have agreed to sell the property at 12 Maple Street. And my client, the buyer, is here to complete that purchase. You have a legally binding contract."
But why?"
David stammered, gesturing wildly between Arthur and me.
"Why would you be buying our mother's house?"
Arthur leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers.
"An excellent question,"
he said softly,
"and one I believe your mother is finally ready to answer."
All eyes in the room swung to me. I had been silent throughout the entire exchange, a quiet, observant presence. My children stared at me, their faces a mixture of fury, fear, and a desperate, pleading confusion. The time for my performance was over. The time for the truth had come. The silence in the room was a fragile, crystalline thing, and I knew my first words would shatter it. My children stared at me, their faces demanding an answer, an explanation for how their perfect, triumphant day had turned into this confusing, terrifying nightmare. Arthur had set the stage. It was my turn to speak. I took a slow, steadying breath and folded my hands on the gleaming mahogany table. When I spoke, my voice was not the weak, reedy voice of the woman from Oak Ridge Meadows. It was a voice my children hadn't heard in years. It was the voice of their mother, the woman who had raised them, and it was clear, calm, and weighted with a sorrowful finality. "You asked why, David," I began, looking directly at my son. "Why Arthur is here. He is here because of a promise. A promise you both made to me in a restaurant a month ago." I turned my gaze to my daughter. "You swore on your father's memory, Linda. You looked me in the eye and you swore you would never sell the house, that it was sacred ground. You promised it would be there, waiting for me." Linda flinched as if I had struck her, a flush of crimson creeping up her neck. "That promise," I continued, my voice unwavering, "was a lie. I think I knew it was a lie the moment you made it. It was too rehearsed, your tears too convenient. But I am your mother, and telling you that you were being cruel and greedy would not have been enough. You wouldn't have listened. So I decided to let you show me, to let you show yourselves the truth of who you've become." I paused, letting the weight of my accusation settle in the room. David, recovering some of his bluster, opened his mouth to protest, but Arthur cut him off before he could speak. "If I may," Arthur said, his voice a calm, authoritative counterpoint to my emotional truth. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document, placing it gently on the table in front of my children. "This is a copy of your father's will. I would like to draw your attention to Article 4, Section B." David and Linda stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "It is commonly known as a life estate clause," Arthur continued, his tone that of a professor lecturing two particularly disappointing students. "It stipulates, in clear, legally binding language, that your mother has the sole and exclusive right to inhabit her home for the remainder of her life. It explicitly states that the property cannot be sold or otherwise encumbered without her express, notarized, written consent. Therefore, the listing agreement you signed with Ms. Bishop is void. This entire transaction is and always has been fraudulent. The word fraudulent hung in the air, thick and poisonous. You have grossly, and I suspect knowingly, overstepped the bounds of the power of attorney your mother granted you, Arthur went on, his voice hardening. It was for managing her ongoing affairs, not for liquidating her primary protected asset. You misrepresented your authority to the realtor and to this title company. You counted on your mother being safely out of the way, too frail and confused to object. That is a serious breach of your fiduciary duty. This is entrapment, David finally exploded, shoving the copy of the will away from him. You set us up. You tricked us. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I looked at my son, at his handsome face, now twisted with the ugly petulance of a child caught cheating. Did I trick you into being greedy, David? I asked, my voice still quiet. Did I trick you into lying to me? Did I trick you into using your father's memory to manipulate your own mother? No, I simply held up a mirror, and this is the reflection you have shown me. I let that sink in before delivering the final, devastating blows. You were so excited about the generous offer from RD Investments, so eager to get your hands on the money. You never once stopped to think, to ask a single question. You never wondered what RD might stand for. I looked at their blank, uncomprehending faces. They are your father's initials, you foolish, foolish children. Richard Davis Miller. Linda let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. And the money? I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I delivered the coup de grace, the mysterious all-cash offer that was the answer to your prayers. Arthur, would you be so kind as to show them the source of the funds? Arthur reached into his briefcase again and slid a single piece of paper across the polished table. It was a bank statement. It showed a recent 7-figure transfer of funds from an account named the Susan Miller Private Trust into the operating account for RD Investments. As you can see, Arthur said calmly, the funds for this purchase originated from a private trust your father established for your mother over a decade ago to protect her from this very eventuality, an account, I might add, that you knew nothing about. He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto both of them, his voice cold and precise. You have spent the last 2 weeks in a state of delirious excitement at the prospect of fraudulently selling your mother her own house back to her, using her own money. It was over. The truth, in all its elegant, brutal simplicity, was laid bare on the table between us. They stared at the bank statement, their faces ashen. The boat, the condo, the easy money, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the stark, humiliating reality of what they had done. They were not clever inheritors. They were not savvy business people. They were greedy, dishonorable children, exposed and outmaneuvered by the very woman they had dismissed as irrelevant. They were fools. And now, finally, they knew it. The silence in the conference room stretched for what felt like an eternity. It was a silence filled with the deafening sound of a life imploding. David and Linda stared at the bank statement on the table as if it were the wreckage of a car crash. The numbers, the names, the dates, they were all undeniable facts that had combined to dismantle their entire reality. Miss Jennings, the title agent, had gone pale and was discreetly pushing the stack of fraudulent closing documents to the far side of the table, distancing herself from the professional carnage. It was Arthur who finally spoke, his voice cutting through the thick, stunned atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel. He stood up, a signal that the proceedings, such as they were now concluded. The offer from RD Investments, he announced to the room at large, is of course formally withdrawn. With that single sentence, the dream of the boat, the condo, and the life of easy luxury vanished into thin air. He then turned his gaze, cold and unflinching, upon my children. Furthermore, He continued, his voice leaving no room for argument.
Due to your blatant, willful, and fraudulent misuse of your mother's power of attorney, I will be filing a petition in court on her behalf this afternoon to have it immediately and permanently revoked. You will no longer have any legal authority over your mother's affairs.
He wasn't finished.
We will also be sending a formal letter to your realtor, Miss Bishop, informing her that she was presented with a fraudulent listing agreement based on your misrepresentation of authority. Any attempt by her or her firm to claim a commission or any other fee will be met with the most aggressive legal response imaginable.
He let those consequences settle before delivering the final, most chilling blow.
Your actions, a coordinated effort to deceive and defraud an elderly parent for financial gain, constitute elder financial abuse. It is a serious crime. Your mother, he paused, glancing at me, out of a grace you frankly do not deserve, has not yet decided whether she wishes to press criminal charges.
I would advise you both to reflect upon that possibility and the potential consequences with the utmost seriousness. The threat, the possibility of actual jail time, finally seemed to pierce through David's shock. He looked up, his face a mask of terror. "Mom," he whispered, his voice a pathetic croak. We didn't mean." I had heard enough. I stood up from my chair, my movement steady and sure. I was no longer playing a part. I was myself again, and I was done. I looked at my two children, these two strangers sitting amidst the ruins of their own greed. The anger I had felt was gone, burned away, leaving only a vast empty landscape of sorrow. "The money is gone, David," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "The house is not for sale, but that is not what you have truly lost today." I walked around the table until I was standing before them. They both flinched, unable to meet my eyes. "You have lost your history," I told them, my voice heavy with the weight of the words. "You have lost your honor. The pencil marks on the pantry door, the memory of your father on the porch swing. You tried to sell all of it. You put a price tag on your own life, on your own family, and in doing so, you have lost your mother, the woman who raised you, who loved you without question, who trusted you. She no longer exists. You have killed her, and you have replaced her with this." I gestured to myself, a stranger who has now learned that she must protect herself at all costs from her own children. I did not offer them forgiveness. I did not offer them comfort. I offered them only the cold, hard truth of the consequences. There was nothing more to say. "Arthur," I said, turning away from them, "I'm ready to go home." "Of course, Susan," he replied gently. He began packing his documents back into his leather briefcase with a calm, deliberate finality. He gave the stunned title agent a polite, apologetic nod. "My apologies for the unconventional nature of this meeting, Miss Jennings." I walked towards the door, my back straight, my head held high. I did not look back. I did not want to see their faces one last time. As my hand touched the doorknob, I heard Linda let out a low, wretched sob. It was the sound of a world breaking. We left them there, sitting in the silent, opulent conference room, surrounded by the useless paperwork of a fortune that had never been real. We walked out of the title company, into the elevator, and across the marble lobby of the building. When the glass door slid open and we stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, I stopped on the sidewalk and took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first free breath I had taken in a month. The battle was over. But as the warmth of the sun touched my face, I knew the victory was a hollow one. I had won back my house, but I had lost my children. The ride home was a quiet, somber affair. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a profound emotional exhaustion. I watched the city streets blur past the car window, my reflection a pale, tired ghost in the glass. Arthur drove in a comfortable silence, sensing that I had no words left in me. As we turned onto the tree-lined familiarity of Maple Street, A deep, aching sadness settled over me. "Are you all right, Susan?" Arthur finally asked, his voice gentle as he pulled the car to a smooth stop at the curb. "I'm relieved, Arthur," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I am not happy. I never imagined a day where winning would feel so much like losing." He nodded, understanding completely. "The wounds your children inflicted today are not legal ones. They will take longer to heal." He reached over and gave my hand a comforting squeeze. "I'll have a man here within the hour to remove that disgusting sign. And I will file the revocation papers for the power of attorney first thing Monday morning. You are in control now, Susan." "Completely." I thanked him, my heart full of gratitude for this good, loyal man. Then I got out of the car. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, simply looking. There it was, my house. The afternoon sun was warm on its familiar white siding. The porch swing swayed gently in the breeze. And there, staked into the center of my lawn like a victory flag for an invading army, was the ugly, garish "For Sale" sign. It was the last scar of the battle, and soon it, too, would be gone. I walked up the stone path, my steps feeling both heavy and light. I found my old house key in my purse, the metal worn smooth from decades of use. The lock turned with a familiar, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was cool and dark, and the air was stale with the scent of a month of abandonment and dust. But it was my dust, my stale air. It smelled like home. I closed the door behind me, and the sounds of the outside world faded away. I was back inside my fortress, my sanctuary. Slowly, I walked from room to room. I ran my hand along the scarred wood of the pantry doorframe, my fingers tracing the faint pencil marks of my children's heights. The memory brought a fresh wave of pain, a sharp, bitter grief for the two small, innocent children who had once stood there, their faces tilted up at their father, full of love and trust. Where had those children gone? I walked into the living room and stood before Richard's armchair. It was just as I had left it, a book lying open on the side table, a silent testament to a life interrupted. I could almost see him there, looking up over his reading glasses with a smile. The silence in the house was no longer the empty, sterile silence of Oak Ridge. It was a companionable quiet, filled with the ghosts of 45 years of love and laughter. I knew what I had to do. I went to the large bay window in the living room and, with a grunt of effort, pushed up the heavy sash. A cascade of fresh, sun-drenched air poured into the room, bringing with it the scent of cut grass and my neighbor's blooming lilacs. Dust motes, liberated from their long slumber, danced in the sunbeams. I went through the entire downstairs, opening every window, chasing out the stale air of betrayal and letting the life of the world back into my home. As I was opening the kitchen window, I saw a movement across the street. It was Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, her face a mixture of surprise and joyous relief. She waved enthusiastically and then bustled out her front door and across the lawn. "Susan!" she cried, her voice full of warmth as she met me at my open front door. "You're home! Oh, I am so glad to see you. We've all been so worried." She pulled me into a hug, a real, heartfelt hug that conveyed more comfort than all the professional kindness at Oak Ridge combined. "That sign," she whispered, shaking her head. "It never felt right." "It's coming down today, Margaret," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "Good," she said with a firm nod. "This is your home. It's right where you belong." That evening, after Arthur's man had come and unceremoniously ripped the "For Sale" sign from my lawn, after Mrs. Gable had brought over a hot casserole so I wouldn't have to cook, I sat in Richard's armchair. The windows were still open,
a cool evening breeze rustling the curtains. The house was breathing again, and so was I. The battle was over. The cost had been immense, a price I never would have imagined paying. But as I sat there, in the quiet, familiar darkness of my own home, surrounded by the ghost of my own life, I knew, without a doubt, that I had won. The seasons have turned. The chill of winter has given way to the gentle, determined warmth of a late spring. 6 months have passed since the day in a lawyer's office, a day that feels both a lifetime ago and like yesterday. I am in my garden, my hands deep in the rich, dark soil. I am planting a new variety of rose bush, a resilient, deep crimson flower named Independence. The name seems fitting. The legal fallout was as quiet and efficient as Arthur had promised. Faced with the undeniable evidence of fraud and the very real threat of criminal prosecution, David and Linda folded completely. They signed every document Arthur put in front of them. The power of attorney was revoked, and they signed a final, binding settlement agreement, relinquishing any and all future claims to my estate, in exchange for my agreement not to pursue the matter with the district attorney. They were, in the cold, clear language of the law, disinherited. I did not take this action out of spite, but out of a need for a clean, unassailable future, free from their influence. I have not spoken to either of them since that day. I received a single, stilted letter from Linda a month ago, full of excuses and self-pity, an apology for getting caught, not for the crime itself. I did not reply. The bond between a mother and her children is a powerful, resilient thing, but it is not unbreakable. They shattered it with their lies, and I have come to accept that some things, once broken, can never be truly mended. I mourn the children I raised, and I pity the strangers they have become. But I no longer ache for their presence in my life. The wound has scarred over, leaving a patch of tough, numb skin where a vital connection used to be. Life at Oak Ridge Meadows seems like a strange, distant dream now. I sometimes think of the women I met there, the polite, resigned widows living out their days in beige rooms. They were good women who had been convinced, by their loving families and a society that values convenience over history, that their lives were a burden to be managed. They had been convinced to trade their fortresses for gilded cages. The fight I endured, the painful, ugly battle I had to wage, was not just for me. It was for them, too. It was a fight for the right to be the author of my own final chapter. My life is fuller now than it was before they tried to take it from me. The crucible of their betrayal burned away the fog of quiet grief I had been living in. It reminded me that I was more than just Richard's widow. I was Susan Miller, a woman of considerable strength. I have reconnected with old friends. I have joined the local historical society. I even host the book club meetings here at the house once a month, filling the rooms with the sound of laughter and lively debate. The house itself feels different. It is no longer just a sanctuary of memory, a quiet museum dedicated to my life with Richard. It is now a testament to my own survival. Every creak of the floorboards, every sunbeam that hits the kitchen floor feels earned. I reclaimed this space. I defended it. The pencil marks on the pantry door are not just a map of my children's past. They are a reminder of a line that was crossed, a boundary that I was forced to defend. This house is no longer just our home. It is my home. I finish planting the new rose bush, patting the soil firmly around its base. I look up at my house, standing solid and proud against the bright blue sky. My children thought my wealth was in the equity of these walls, in the rising property values of this street. They were so wrong. They had been poor long before they ever tried to steal from me. Poor in character, in honor, and in love. My true wealth is in the feel of this soil.
in the scent of Richard's roses, in the quiet, unshakable knowledge of who I am. I am not a problem to be managed. I am not a chapter to be closed. I am a woman, in her own home, on her own terms, with a whole new garden to tend.